ladies and gentlemen, we now come to one of the high points of the annual St. Gallen Symposium, which is the Wings of Excellence Award. And this year the title is Empowering the Next Generation. And it's my privilege and responsibility to introduce the chairman, Professor Yoko Ishikura, from the Graduate School of Media Design in Keio, where she's a professor of international business strategy. She is no stranger to St. Gallen. I think this is her 5th visit. It's a great pleasure to have you, and we look really to this terrific presentation which you're going to chair. So it's over to you, Yoko.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Lord Griffiths. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to address or to chair this session. And my name is Yoko Ishikura, and I should be standing over there, right? So I thought probably I should. Okay, this is the welcome to the anniversary award session entitled Empowering the Next Generation. I don't think we need any explanation as to why the younger generation or the next generation is very important, because they are more than half of the global population. What I mean by that is that those who are under the age of 30 is more than half of the global population. So we really need to empower the next generation. And we thought that you might wonder, why is it, are we doing it for the Wing of Excellence Award ceremony? And I think it's because this essay competition called St. Gallen Wing of Excellence essay competition is one of the very effective tools to empower the next generation. Because since we started in 1989, which is 25 years ago, and this is the anniversary, 25th anniversary of the student competition, we have had over 20,000 applications of essays voicing, representing the voices of the next generation. And we have about 5,000 to 6,000 qualifiers who came to the St. Gallen Symposium. And as far as I understand it, and I've been here five times, I think for most of them, coming to the St. Gallen Symposium has been the life-changing experience, because they get to see the leaders of today, and they get to see the leaders, co-leaders, their colleagues, the leaders of tomorrow. And so we decided to do something a little different to commemorate the 25th anniversary. Usually we have presentations by the 3 winners, but we decided to do something a little different. And as you can see, we are sort of in a little bit informal, casual kind of setup. It's a little bit different from the formal St. Gallen Symposium, the plenary session. So it's supposed to be like student apartment. We don't have any pizza or beer, but I think we're okay. We just have to wait another hour and a half or so. So everybody is more or less dressed casually, and we're going to do the debate. And what we're going to do is that, as you can tell, we are trying something a little bit new, and that is graphics and drawings. As we talk, and as we have a heated discussion, hopefully, the graphic designers are going to draw what we are discussing. So we'll see how it goes. And I have this incredible task at the end to sum up whatever we have discussed using some of the drawings. So we'll see how it goes. And it is what I would like to do is I would like to introduce or explain the procedure. And we're going to have 3 key topics: technology, wealth, and values. And we have like 9 speakers or 9 panelists all together. And let me introduce these 9 speakers. As you can tell, they are not sort of lined up from, these are the younger generation, older generation, so forth. And unfortunately, we have just 2 women in the panel, as Bree pointed out earlier. But let me introduce. We have 3 opinion leaders, each taking one of the topics. For technology, we have Burton Lee, lecturer of Stanford, who's over there. And we have Chandran Nair, CEO of Global Institute for Tomorrow. And we have Thomas Pogge of Yale University. And we also have 3 winners of the St. Gallen Wing of Excellence of this year. And they are Kilian Semmelmann over there, and I'll be introducing their essays, and we'll have an award ceremony later on after this panel. And right next to me is Dragov. Is one of the 3 winners. And over there is Bree Romuld, another winner. In addition to these 3 winners, we have 3 leaders of tomorrow. And one of them is Scott Young, over at that end. He's a research fellow at Canadian International Council. And he was the leader of tomorrow last year, so he's been here before. And we also have Lorenczik. Where are you? Right there. He's a fellow in economics at Oxford. And we have Hrishabh Sandilya. Okay. President of Anglo-American University in Prague. So these are the 9 speakers, and we're going to start off with the technology area. And what we're going to do is that at the beginning of each one of these 3 sessions, I'm going to ask the opinion leaders, one of the opinion leaders, to give us what they call impulse of remarks for like 8 to 10 minutes. And then it's going to be followed by one of the winners of this year's competition, and then we'll discuss, and we'll open up to the debate among these 9 people. And then we'll go on to values, and we'll go on to wealth and values. And at the end, we'll try to figure out what we will do next. Okay? So let's start off with Bert, if you can.
Thank you. Are we on? Great. It's a great honor to be here. I have 8 minutes to talk to you about the role of technology and its connection to empowering the next generation. And I'm specifically going to focus on software. Before getting into it, how many of you have an active LinkedIn profile? Facebook profile? Active Twitter users? Not so many. Google Plus? How many of you are Angry Birds players? Okay, good.
Okay.
The question I'm going to address tonight is, why is technology important for empowering the new generation, next generation, young people? And I'm going to talk specifically about 2 types of software, and not about the third. I'm going to talk primarily about consumer and enterprise software and not embedded software. Embedded software is really industrial software that you find in automobiles and elevators. And purely from a wealth generation, job creation perspective, it's not that important. At the top of the pyramid, however, comes consumer software. And I include in that social media, gaming, big data, cloud, internet, for example. Now, some of that spills also over into enterprise software, which is the second category. But if you think about these 3 software sectors in terms of global impact, just order of magnitude, embedded, and don't take these numbers literally, embedded software, again, it's more industrial software, $10 billion a year, just the differences are what I'm trying to get at. Enterprise, maybe $100 billion a year, and consumer, $1 trillion a year. So approximately order of magnitude impact in sales, revenues, market value creation, job impact creation. Consumer software is extremely important. I'm spending a lot of time up front discussing the definitions because there's quite a bit of confusion in Europe, I found, between consumer software, consumer enterprise versus embedded software. And there are big differences in how these industries play out in terms of job creation, wealth creation, the speed of innovation, et cetera, et cetera. I want to focus primarily on consumer software because that's where the fastest innovation cycles are taking place. It's where the greatest numbers of new companies are being created, not just in the United States, not just in Silicon Valley, but also in London, in Helsinki, Tallinn, Sofia, Berlin, EPFL, Lausanne, Zurich, as well as Madrid, all across Europe. It's the ICT, it's the software companies, primarily consumer, where the most new company creation is taking place. Now, the reason this is important is we're going to talk now about the connection between consumer software and wealth creation, value creation, and new company creation. And I'm going to talk specifically about what I call probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of Silicon Valley, which is essentially the wealth creation, the value creation engine. And we're going to use as an example, however, Microsoft out of Seattle and how many companies they've created in their first early days between 1975 and 2009. So between 75 and 2009, Microsoft employees have created hundreds of new companies. They've left Microsoft to go on and found these companies. The reason they've been able to do this is because many of them are scientists and engineers themselves, so they know how to make things, they know how to develop new products and services. But equally as importantly, because of the stock options system at Microsoft and most other major US companies, many of these Microsoft employees have had the financial capital. They've been millionaires who've been able to go off and self-fund their own companies. So when you put together young people with engineering, scientific know-how, but also who have capital to actually build companies, to fund initial operations before angels and VCs come in, you get a very strong combination that has major ecosystem impact. When you have this happening hundreds of times just out of Microsoft, new companies being created, primarily by young people, by the next generation. When you take that over to Facebook, hundreds of new companies being created. Every time you have a major IPO, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, we're creating tens of thousands of new employees, but more importantly, we're creating thousands of new millionaires, investors, who then go on to invest in a new generation of companies. So this engine of growth, this engine of creation, which we've seen at Microsoft, which has been documented at Microsoft, we also see it being mirrored at Facebook, at Google. But if you go back to the early days of Hewlett-Packard, Intel, other major companies, Cisco, hardware companies that have come out of Silicon Valley, you see the same cycle of companies being spun off by former employees. The strongest impact, however, is clearly around consumer software and then to some extent around enterprise software companies. So why is this, and by the way, the numbers we're talking about are in the trillions of dollars of value creation, wealth creation, that is being coming out of these software companies, consumer and enterprise software companies. This is an economic engine, it's a scaling engine, which is for the most part missing in Europe today. We don't have the major software companies in Europe today having hundreds of new companies being spun out of them by former employees for a number of reasons, because the employees generally don't take stock options, don't appreciate stock options, lower valuations here in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't have in Europe this connection of activated science and engineering people, young people, together with the capital wherewithal to start their own companies. So this is a major hole in the European innovation and startup ecosystem, which I think has major impacts across Europe for what is not happening when it comes to new job creation. The connection to empowering the next generation is that the primary beneficiaries, the primary actors in creating these new companies, in creating thousands of new jobs, in leading these new companies, are young engineers, scientists, business people, and doctors. So we believe in Silicon Valley, based on our experience of doing this thousands of times, that one of the best ways you can empower young people, the next generation, is to train them as engineers and scientists, teach them coding skills. It's easier today than ever before to code up new applications, new services, new software products. Give them some capital to start a company, start a new product concept, a new service concept, and let them run with it, let them build a team, develop their own leadership skills. This is where we find major paradigm shifts, changes in empowering young people in a way you don't see in most other places around the world. And it's beginning to happen here in Europe as well, in Berlin, in London, where you're seeing successful startup scenes beginning to reach critical mass. So this is how technology, particularly software technology, connects to empowering the next generation, but it also has a big impact on wealth creation, value creation. What the difference is between Europe and the US, Silicon Valley around this, is that much of this new wealth creation coming out of the software sector is not being recycled to the old elites. It's going to new young people who have new energy, who are scientists, engineers, who actually know how to build and make things, versus new wealth going to bankers, going into real estate investments, going into non-productive investments. So this is the power of young people that we see from Silicon Valley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bert. It's a very nice way of sort of incorporating the US perspectives, because I think the plenary session in the morning has heavily focused on Europe. So, and I'm very glad, even though I don't quite belong to the next generation, I started learning how to code. So, let me just ask the Kilian to give us your thoughts.
Well, pretty much I think Burton is right when speaking about technology as a general enabler of the new generation. Just think about what happened the last few days. We used huge metal containers basically to fly through the sky. We arrived and we got welcomed by people we have never met before, but who knew who we are, what our name is, and what we look like. We keep in touch with small, tiny devices with our friends and family wherever they are. And one second. And while I'm talking, everything gets recorded and simultaneously broadcasted in the whole world for everyone to watch. So I think we could agree that technology is amazing and an enabler. We could study at online universities, we could do research on the web, we could crowdfund our businesses. And we have, right now, it's the age where we have access to any information at any place, and just through one single click, and we could use that information and discuss it with people all over the world. So I think technology is really an enabler, and it produces an environment and a life that is safer and more comfortable to us and easier than we could not have imagined like a decade ago or so. But I think there are also problems, or there might be problems with that. Right now, technology gets just thrown at us, and each year we're getting newer, faster, smaller, more embedded devices, software, and networks. Everything gets more and more interwoven and with our natural, with our offline life. And I think there are dangers, because by using that technology, we also get more and more transparent, and we somehow might lose control over this technology. For example, who exactly knows what it means to use the GPS on his smartphone, to get GPS tracked on his smartphone? Why is it so easy to use your social network login on hundreds of websites on the web? And how is a company able to actually know about a pregnancy before the parents tell anyone about it? I think these are just a few questions we have to think and talk about when thinking about the technology of the last years and the upcoming years. And I think it's especially important to ask these questions when thinking about the next generation, who will grow up, be born in that embedded, interconnected life, and will grow up with that life. And so the main question I think we should ask, is it still us who uses technology, or is technology actually about to use us?
Okay, thank you. Very good. Excellent, excellent. Let me open up to the floor, but before that, let's ask what Scott has to say. You're in the technology and international relations, right?
Ish. I'd say I'm coming from an international relations background, but very intrigued by the impact of technology on both international relations, but in society. And Professor, I think we read different briefs, to be honest. If I were to borrow an analogy from Chrystia Freeland, who just wrote about plutocrats and we're not talking about the 1%, but the 0.00001%. I think it's very easy for us to get intimidated by small numbers and not scared enough of big numbers. And what I mean by that is you referred to thousands of companies being spun out of Silicon Valley in the Seattle, Puget Sound region. You referred to tens of thousands of jobs being created, spun off, and that sort of innovation is exciting. It's the focus of the world. We all know about Silicon Valley. I think the concern is we also have a planet of 7 billion people. And so if you want to make the same analogy, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Rovio in Finland, which is not in Silicon Valley, they still fit in one large sports stadium. And my concern is that that's still a very, very small percentage of what we're referring to in terms of the next generation. And so, Professor, I know you, when we spoke yesterday, you asked for solutions, and so I had a real think about how do we disseminate that innovation from that top, like the tip of the pyramid. If you see that pyramid the Danish artists have drawn up there, you can't even see the 0.00001%. How do you disseminate them? There's two ways of looking at it, and it's a very simple solution, and it comes down to education. Kilian mentioned how we have that lack of knowledge, that lack of speed. The number of people that understand what Anonymous does, what a DDoS is, are very small. The people that can read a Twitter API, very, very small. So why not educate the leaders of today? Leaders of today, the politicians, the regulators, legislatures, why can't they read the algorithms? Why can't they do that? We just have a lack of base knowledge. So that's one solution, a top-down element of education where we have politicians and legislators that can have some familiarity with what they're trying to legislate. Instead of running scared away from technology, being very frightened by what it means and the transformative effect it will have, I think we need legislators that can be a bit more fluent and comfortable. And I'm not talking just being able to tweet. That's ground zero, that's below ground zero. We need politicians that should be able to code in X number of languages. And the flip side of that, I'd say, is we need young people. This is us. This is on us and Professor Ishikura to learn how to code as well, right? We need to know how to hack our own refrigerators, hack our own cars, maybe not driverless cars, but we need that sort of level of education. That onus is on us. So rather than focus just on one time zone, I'm from the west coast of Canada, so that one time zone, I think we need to be a bit more inclusive and sort of realize that we're talking about something that is going to have a real fundamental impact on how the 21st century goes, positively or negatively. And we can get into the risks and challenges later.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks. I mean, given the importance of coding and a little more knowledge about how to use and how the mechanics work, why are the leaders of today not doing it? And are leaders of tomorrow doing enough of that? What do you think? I mean, I'm not just putting it on the spot, anybody.
So I think we're still dealing with very old models of education systems, primary, secondary, higher education. In Estonian secondary schools are beginning to teach coding to high school students. Personally, I think coding training should start in primary school. It's a great way of teaching young kids to think and actually teaching them that they can do something, build something that works. It's very empowering to teach engineering, science skills to anybody and everybody. These new languages that have come out are accessible to the entire world, so prime ministers can learn how to code apps, so can 5-year-olds, okay? So we're at a point in history now where some very complex technologies have been simplified enough to the point where literally anybody can code and develop a new product or service online that other people can use. This is a very pivotal point in human history. What's not catching up are the old primary, secondary, and higher level education systems at this point.
But at the same time, we have a lot of online type of education, which is coming up. And that gives a lot of opportunities for anybody. I mean, anybody, anywhere in the world, they can get an access to all these things. at the same time.
Yes.
But just getting back to Kilian's point of, we have a lot of data and we're sort of constantly monitored. And what do we do with it? I mean, are we aware of that, or are we just kind of, well, what can I do? I mean, we are more or less limited to that.
I mean, I think that's one of the main issues that most people are still thinking as users. They're just using technology instead of thinking behind the surface, becoming aware or conscious users. And if you do that, when you think about when I'm entering my data on some website, or I let it record, or let it stream, or anything, what could somebody else do with it? And just think through these issues and try to figure out what could I, or how could I commercially use that data that I'm providing right now for free. Then that thought or that behavior should change pretty quickly, I guess.
Okay. Let me go on to the next topic, and that is the
What are you done?
The wealth. And I understand that Bernard Lee, Bert talked a lot about the use of technology, and technology as an enabler, and wealth creation as well as value creation. And I would like to turn to Chandran, whether you would agree with that.
Right, okay. I'm going to take some risks, not be so polite. I know I'm in Switzerland, but please bear with me. But because I'm not a bank or investment of hedge funds, etc., you don't have to be too worried. I'm not going to be gambling with your money. I'm just going to be gambling with some words and take some risk. I think we need more geeks like I need a hole in my head. Okay? I think we need more people who know how to grow rice, are knowledge workers, and do other stuff. And I'm really troubled when, we have a North American narrative that essentially thinks everyone's on an iPad, is connected to the internet, etc. To all the young people here, I want to say I'm not on Facebook. I do Face Life, which is, there's no electronic intermediary. It's called talking to someone. And I don't do that other idiotic thing called, is it Twitter? Okay. So when I was in China recently, I said to 300 students, I don't do this. One student earnestly stood up and said, but Mr. Nair, why don't you do Facebook or Twitter? No, Twitter. And I looked at them and said, paused a little, I said, because I'm cool. Okay? So I don't need no idiot following me. And I don't need people who don't know me to like me. I just need the people I know to kind of like me and try and have a conversation with them. But the most serious point I'm trying to make here is, my God, we are obsessed with the narrative of technology without understanding the overreach. Let's just a minute about internet. Do you know what is the greatest activity and traffic on the internet? Anyone?
Porno.
It's porn. All right? It's porn. So don't hide. We all know you're up to it. Okay? Okay? But who is to protect the 9-year-old girl in Kalimantan? I'm not talking about the Californians because they kind of got used to it. Okay, Silicon Valley shit. Okay? Extreme narcissism. But who is to protect the little girl in Tibet, Kalimantan, Tamil Nadu, or in Brunei from pornography? Not the good guys at Google. They could, it's called algorithms. Only the state. But my God, if the state intervenes, then you're repressive. So let's be very careful about what we talk about. And in terms of courageous conversations as well, I want to challenge the young people here. I think firstly, you should not call yourselves, is it leaders of the future? I mean, that is outrageously arrogant.
What's that? Young overachiever.
I think I'm called an opinion leader. My God, I'm not a leader. I have opinions, very strong ones, but follow me if you like, but not on Facebook. Okay. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that I think the young people, and I come to many things like this, and every time I meet the so-called young leaders of the future, I feel they came out of the same factory. Do you know? They all speak the same. They all dress the same, and they all have the same ambitions. And then, of course, they want that thing on that CV that says, I went to a social mission, I did a little volunteer thing, I care about the world. But all they want to do is follow today's leaders. Okay? So please, do not seek legitimacy through association with the institutions of the old. That's the first thing I would challenge you all. You might have heard several things that's said today that in the morning that I'd like you to disabuse you of. And the first one I heard today was, and you all understand, is capitalism, by the way, is not banking. And we had a whole session about capitalism, and all we talked about was banking. Please, young people, understand, it's not. Secondly, we heard a statement that globalization is now under threat. Well, it's not actually. Globalization is an amorphous thing that just carries on, okay? The only problem is the people who wrote the rules to benefit themselves now feel a bit uneasy because some others are saying, hey, we want to also have a say in the rules, okay? That's a different thing. That's a different thing. And then we heard that apparently capitalism is self-correcting. My God, have you all had amnesia about what's happened in the last 5 years?
Well said.
I mean, where have you been? And then we had some sort of connection about capitalism and physics and pendulums. Well, capitalism is anything but physics, okay? Rate of returns 20% is not a law of physics. It's called externalization of costs to create margins so that no one knows where you got it from. That's what it's called. So please, young people, be careful. So my challenge to you in terms of empowering you is not to patronize you when saying how great you are. I think firstly you need to find another word. Don't call yourself leaders of the future. Maybe call yourself mujahideen. Call yourself upstarts, because most of you are. Something like that, so that we get a flavor for that. You're going to be, in my face if I say something wrong, rather than say polite things so that you can come back here next year. I have a funny feeling I might not be back here next year. But that's cool too. I'm busy, Now, my point about wealth, though, is this. Wealth creation and the path to prosperity of all will have to be redefined in the 21st century. We have come, oh my God, I've only got 2 minutes left? Okay. We have come to the end of 2-3 centuries of essentially the Western model of growth, which has built the modern world, of which there's a lot of good things. But we have come to the end of 2-3 centuries of Western exceptionalism, exploitation, and extractive-led growth. That time is over. And why? Because for 4 reasons. 1, the world's population will peak at somewhere between 12 and 15 billion. There'll be 10 billion people in Asia, in my neighborhood, 6 billion of them possibly. Second, climate change will change everything. And I'm not going to create the most extreme arguments for that. Third, we have technology overreach. And I can go into fossil fuels, etc. How extraction and investments for extraction absolutely exceed anything to do with abatement of the negative symptoms of technology. And lastly, of course, the crisis of capitalism, which I'll boil down to this. Capitalism essentially requires you. You all know austerity and all of those sort of esoteric arguments, but simply put, it comes down to this. When we had the recession in 2008, we in Asia were told, you Asians, you guys don't understand. You must all consume more. So we Asians felt, hey, they've come to us. After 2-3 centuries of being second class, now we're first class. The Indians felt good. Even the Brits called them up and said, please, help out. The Raj had come for help. The point is this, though. 5-6 billion Asians cannot and should not aspire to consume like the average American or European. This is not possible. The law of physics, thermodynamics, biology, and entropy means it's not possible. We'll have to do something very different. But of course, no one wants to confront these realities, because who will tell the Asians they can't have? Not the Western liberal governments. Because the notion is that the individual is king, and therefore he can have everything. So I'll finish by saying that the generation that you all are, the young people here, firstly, if you go to the wrong schools, I mean the Harvards, all of those guys, you will learn all that mumbo-jumbo at the same time that the edifice of the ideology is crumbling. Please go home, study in the field. You don't need to come back to places like this to understand. That's very important. We need to do very things differently, and ultimately, if resources are constrained, and we need more apps like I need a hole in my head, right? What we need is, clearly, what does prosperity look like? And therefore, redefining rights. That flies in the face of the Western liberal narrative that the individual is king, that free markets, co-joined with capitalism, will serve us all, and finally, technology with the panacea for all our ills. This is not possible. And therefore, in Asia, we'll have to have a new narrative, because 5-6 billion Asians can't have it all. They'll have to have something different if we're to have more equitable societies. Because, my friends, the physics is very clear. There isn't enough to go around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chandran. I thought when we were talking before this panel, I kind of warned him. If you included St. Gallen as one of the business schools, you're going to be in big trouble. And that's why he didn't, I suppose. But let me go on to Rado.
Oh, hi everyone. Well, that's a tough act to follow, to say the least. Yes, I won't speak that much about technology or pornography on the internet, but I want to talk about wealth creation. And I believe that the way our concept of wealth creation nowadays is fundamentally wrong and has to change. Because nowadays we equate wealth creation with GDP growth, and that is a very wrong way to see things. For instance, activities that damage the environment contribute to the growth of GDP. So much of the new wealth that's actually created is money borrowed from destiny that have to be returned with high interest rate in the form of costs of climate change, costs, and depletion of resources. So we have these problems, and obviously we gotta do some short-term sacrifices for long-term benefit. But I'm here to tell you, more specifically give you 3 reasons why we're actually not going to do that and why the status quo is going to remain. So the first reason is that if you want a sustainable growth, then you have to implement policies that go against the interests of many corporations, but particularly oil, gas, and mining companies. And these companies are one of the largest in the world. They wield enormous resources. They sponsor political campaigns, and they have a whole army of lawyers and lobbyists ready to be unleashed. The second reason is it is very, very highly unlikely that important economies like China and India will enact policies that will actually slow down economic growth or in any way diminish their competitiveness in around the world. So we saw that recently, Q1 2013, the Chinese economy grew only by 7.7. And analysts at Wall Street were almost committing suicides because they thought that was the end of the world. And it was 7.7, which brings us an important point. If the current model that we have has contributed to the development of India and China and has lifted millions of people out of poverty, why should we stop this model? And this brings me to my third and last problem, and I think it's the most difficult one to eradicate, is that we as human beings cannot relate to future pain. And I'm sure that many students know this fact, especially when essay deadlines come or exams. But that means for our human civilization that we see climate change, depletion of resources, as something abstract. We cannot relate to it, so we don't take the necessary measures right now. We are not willing to do the sacrifice right now. And we treat it as somebody else's problem. And for older generations, it is somebody else's problem. However, older generations usually tend to vote more in large numbers than young people, and of course, politicians listen to them. well, this problem can even be exacerbated by the aging population of the world. So after all the nasty things I've said, the really pessimistic predictions, I really hope that the people in the panel can contradict me and just point some arguments that the future is actually bright.
Okay. That was rather a pessimistic picture coming from the future generation. But let me turn to Christian.
Yes.
Who is in charge of who is in the area of economic development?
Yeah, I'm certainly from the wrong school, so I don't know if you want to take me seriously or not. So just a few things, my thoughts about it. So first of all, the financial crisis is a sign of capitalism, and we heard today many times that it's going to repeat. But at the same time, you can think of an alternative economy, a central planner economy. The Soviet Union, North Korea, there you don't see the same sort of business cycles that you see at the moment. But frankly, I don't want to go back there. I mean, it's very stable there, but we don't have any sort of prosperity and personal initiative and development. So if I have to make the choice, I'd rather live in a prospering economy most of the time and in an economic downturn some of the time. So that's my easy choice, and yeah, that's what I would like to say just to this point. Another thing, you were very skeptical about technology. But I think technology is actually the key how we can save resources. You say that you're not using Facebook and you have other means of communicating. So you have to travel here, you have to write letters if you want to communicate with people. But writing a letter, sending it off to someone from Hong Kong to the US takes a lot of resources. Just posting it on Facebook requires much less resources. It's much more efficient. And this way, we don't need to use more resources. Technology enables us to use less resources while making people better off, have a better technology on Facebook than writing letters. So that's my point. Technology is actually helping us with these issues to make everyone better off while protecting resources that we have in the economy. Another thing is that I'm not so pessimistic about technological development. In my view, we have seen 150 years, 200 years of prosperity, as you have said, and I don't want to go back to the 1,000 years before that, where people were organized in strict rules in society and couldn't show initiative. And so, until we are sure that there's no further potential for technological development and for improvements of living standards, I think we should allow people to make the best of it and then ask for the governments to set the regulatory requirements, but not to interfere with the process, because that's the most successful system we have seen so far.
Can I respond?
Sure.
Okay. I think and I don't want to be dismissive, but we've heard these arguments before. I don't know how many of you know that there are more mobile devices in the world today than toilets. Kind of before dinner, that makes me usually slightly constipated. Of course we need technology. I'm an engineer. But we need technology applied to meeting the most basic needs of people. And I would encourage all the young people here to become sanitation engineers. We need toilets. Okay? We need business models that allow us to have mobile phones which are, externalized costs. Because in Hong Kong, if I want a mobile phone, I go to see a Mr. Lee. And Mr. Lee says, Chandran, do you want this phone? By the way, it's for free. All I have to do is do that service contract. Some genius in a business school came up with services. That phone is free because the cost of making that has been externalized. That's why your iPad is made in China, not in California. Right? That mobile phone is extremely expensive. How come it's so cheap? Right. So the mobile phone has become ubiquitous because the costs have all been externalized. Then we blame the poor Chinese, and it's easy to blame them because you can say nasty communists, etc. And wait till they go to India and make the mobile phones, then something else will happen. But I have this image that wouldn't all the geeks in India be better off designing toilets? Because I have this image of, all the geeks in Bangalore walking around with their GPSs trying to locate the only sanitary toilet in the entire city. Right? And if there's any filmmaker here, I'm up to writing the script for, the sequel to Slumdog Millionaire. This would be a big hit, okay? Technology, toilets, and freedom in India. But the most serious point I'd like to make, though, is very importantly, we need to understand, though, that this is not about, the letter versus the email. That's just tip of the iceberg, okay? If you look at fisheries, for instance, technology today, and I know a bit about this stuff, technology today has aided and abated the destruction of our oceans. We have the technology to do something about it. What we do not have are the institutions to put the rules in. So soon, one day, in the not too distant future, the last bluefin tuna in the South Pacific Oceans will be caught, aided by technology, and got to Hong Kong and within 2 hours so that you can have your sashimi. We must be a lot more honest about the role of technology. I believe in technology, but my God, technology without rules will be catastrophic.
Great. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say as a response to Christian, he mentions, well, if it's not our model right now, then it will be North Korea and USSR or something like that. But that's a false choice. I mean, why not be Norway, for instance? I don't know much about economics, but as I know, Norway concentrates on social redistribution. It protects its fisheries. And you can see it's one of the richest countries in the world, no matter how you look at it. And the fact that something has worked for 150 years doesn't mean it will always apply. Now, I definitely don't want to get metaphysical here, but for instance, religion at some point in the development, I guess that's more interesting, but bear with me. So religion at some point in humanity had its purpose. I mean, it was our first attempt at philosophy, at physics, at everything. It binded societies together. But along came the Enlightenment and felt that actually religion was restricting human progress. So it's time to move to something else. This is, a very broad metaphor, but something that has worked for hundreds of years can be changed and for the better.
Okay, good. Thank you. What I would like to say. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to. I'm about to do something very un-Canadian. It may take my passport away for this, but Mr. Nair, it's very easy to criticize something that we don't fully understand, and I think we all agree that social media, Twittery, and Facebook are the height of narcissism. I don't think anybody would disagree with that there.
I don't see anybody saying that, so.
I'm saying it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
First time.
And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, and the rest of it. And I play Angry Birds as well.
I don't.
But the way you're reacting to social media and to technology reminds me of how the Catholic Church reacted to Galileo. And it's very easy to criticize.
You were around that time?
No, I'm a leader of the future. I'm a leader of tomorrow. I'm a leader of next week.
Not yesterday.
Not yesteryear.
You seem to be coming from the past.
But what I would like to ask you, it's very easy to criticize. How do we develop those rules for technology? Where should we start with states or non-state actors?
Absolutely. And I'm delighted you've asked that question. Because, I've been to some of the world's leading forums, World Economic Forum, etc., and they have all the tech gurus in. You ask that one question: who protects a 9-year-old girl from pornography in ancient societies, all cultures? And no one gives me an answer. And I won't name the icons of the IT industry I've asked this question to. So my point is this: ask the hard question, because all we get is that it's the savior. Of course, I use the internet, and I'm not abused. I don't discuss it. I made the point about Facebook and Twitter because I think it's kind of low-class stuff. But that doesn't mean that other people shouldn't use it. My point, though, is who is to? Now, and I was at a session with the Chinese minister just now, and she talked, and I have spoken to Chinese officials. The moment China intervened in the internet, what did the U.S. government say? Repressive. Hillary Clinton said, you guys are backward. That is the discussion. One of the main concerns in many developing countries is pornography. right? But very few Asian ministers or et cetera will come up here and say this, because next thing you know, some US senator is going to say, oh man, they're repressive, okay? All I'm saying is, who's going to do it? I don't know, but I believe ultimately it can only be the institutions of the state. It cannot be self-regulation.
Now, institutions of the state, would you trust the state of Iran or Syria?
Here you go again,
or Singapore?
demonizing a country. What do you know about Iran that allows Iran, by the way, to suggest that Iran is this demon?
Can I
Be careful.
I just have
Be
a point.
very careful.
I think we're seeing two different extremes.
Sure.
When Burton was speaking, I heard a lot about millionaires, software millionaires. When can we start harnessing technology for social good? So the social good that Chandran wants to see, we want to see technology creating wealth. What's the in-between? How do we sort of push people to improve society at all levels, in a sustainable level, not just money, and not sort of...
All I tried to make the point is, with the emphasis on software, was that technology will make, hopefully, the world better. But please, it's not about software and the internet. It's not. Technology, I was again flippant by talking about toilets. There's a whole range of simple technologies that will make the world a better place. That is not where money flows, because the Ponzi schemes that evaluate your .coms without any earnings feed off each other. What's the earnings of Facebook, by the way? No more said.
Okay. Let me go on to the third topic, which is the values, because I think it's all related to values, and I really would like to cover them all, and we can all come back to this discussion. So I would like to ask Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing is pretty clear when you think about technology and wealth, namely that there's a lot more of it than there used to be. So there's been a huge amount of progress with regard to technology and wealth, but with values it's not so clear. So think about for a moment whether we've had moral progress in the last 100, 200 years or so, or just in the last 20 or 25 that you can remember. So one thing that is on the negative side of the ledger, admittedly that these positive things about increased wealth and technology, which are always also from a moral point of view perhaps good things, but one thing on the negative side is poverty. Poverty is still very much with us. And if you look at, for example, how the bottom half of the human population lives, income in the bottom half now tops out at $60 a month, or if you take purchasing power parities, at about $100 a month. And if you take the bottom quarter, it tops out actually at $22 or $48 in purchasing power parity. So these are very low figures showing that a very, very large number of people are still quite poor. And this poverty is in many ways, of course, somewhat less than the poverty that used to exist, but it's also, in another sense, much worse than the poverty that used to exist because it's just so much more avoidable. The bottom half of the human population today has about 3% of global household income, the bottom 40% have 2%, and the bottom quarter has about 1% of global household income. You could easily double the income of the people in the bottom half. They'd have 6%, the top half would have 94%, and the top 5% would go down from 46% to 43% of global household income. Wouldn't be so bad. So this immense avoidability of poverty and the persistence of it at the same time is what makes me doubt that we've had a lot of moral progress. Think also about how severe that poverty really is. So think about people living off $100, or the equivalent in purchasing power of $100 a month, or in the bottom quarter of below $48. What that means is it's life-threatening poverty, and still about 1/3 of all human deaths are from poverty-related causes, basically from trivial diseases that we don't even know about in the richer countries. And so all these deaths, 1/3, 18 million a year, vastly outnumbering the deaths from wars and civil wars and government repression, are still very much with us. Now, in addition to that, you have other important problems which have already been mentioned. We have problems of climate change, which affect future generations, could potentially have catastrophic impact, and we have problems of security, in particular against dangerous technologies such as weapons of mass destruction and also various ostensibly peaceful technologies that could easily lead to very destructive effects. For example, biomedical experiments could lead to epidemics and so on. These problems are pretty severe, and we are perfectly equipped to handle these problems, but we have so far not really found a good way to deal with them. We have now a rapidly growing and pretty effective set of global institutional arrangements. We have the WTO, for example, but these arrangements are so far still very undemocratic. There's little accountability, even little transparency in supranational rulemaking. And as a consequence, these rules are often determined by those who are able to lobby the most powerful governments, and those are the big industry associations, the big banks, the hedge funds, the billionaires, and so on. And most ordinary people are essentially shut out of these supranational rulemaking processes. That is something that, of course, leads to their interests also being largely disregarded, and so the rules reflect very much the interests of the very richest members of human society to the detriment of the poor. And that's why I think the share of global household income that goes to the bottom half of the human population has been steadily shrinking to the point where it is now at around 3%. Now, what could we do? Well, one thing we can do, of course, is to try to make these rule-making processes, supranational procedures, somewhat more democratic, at the very least more transparent, so that ordinary people can know in real time what's being negotiated in these international fora, what is being discussed, what is being proposed by various countries. Another thing we can do is to think about other ways in which these rules could be designed, ways that would be more mindful of the interests of the poor. I want to give you one example of that, which has to do with poverty, and in particular with the great amount of ill health that is associated with poverty. In the mid-1990s, together with the WTO treaty, we adopted the TRIPS agreement, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which essentially prescribed the one-size-fits-all model for protecting intellectual property in all countries. Every country, as a condition of becoming a member of the WTO, had to sign up to the TRIPS agreement. Now, the TRIPS agreement has particularly pernicious effects in the areas of seeds and pharmaceuticals. What it means is that all countries in the world have to grant 20-year product patents on pharmaceuticals, and that means that generic companies cannot, as they could before TRIPS, invent around a patent and find a different way of making an existing molecule, a new medically effective molecule, and then sell it at cheaper prices to poor people. India, for example, had 7-year process patents, allowing people to invent around the process that was patented to create the same molecule in a different way. That door has now shut. India is also giving out 20-year product patents, and so people in India and all over the developing world have to wait for about 15 years or so until the effective life of the patent is concluded in order to get to the point where they can also get access to the medicine at generic prices. Now, a very intelligent alternative to this way of incentivizing pharmaceutical innovation would be to incentivize it with rewards based on the health impact of medicines. So what I'm suggesting is we should have a system where new pharmaceuticals can be rewarded on the basis of the health impact that they achieve in the world. Of course, on condition that the innovator is prepared to forgo the usual markup rewards. So the condition would be that you sell the medicine everywhere at cost, and you are rewarded from public funds to which countries all over the world would contribute in proportion to the health impact that your medicine achieves. This would be a much better system that on the one hand would give access to medicines from day one even to poor people, and secondly would also bring within the purview of pharmaceutical R&D the great neglected diseases of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting way of measuring how the social impact. As we talked about, technology can be used for social good, and that's one specific way of measuring the impact. Let me turn to Bree to give us some your thoughts.
Sure, thanks. I think Professor Pogge has given a really interesting snapshot picture of the notion of values, or perhaps non-values, in the systemic level. But I want to turn the conversation back a little bit to the topic of this debate, which is about empowering our generation and what we as young people throughout this room, how we engage with values. I actually asked the organisers before this, why are you putting values at the end? Because behind technology and wealth, because to me it seemed like this is the important stuff, and this frames how we use technology and how we use wealth, or conceive of wealth. And I think that point's come out by itself anyway. The discussion of technology has turned to values anyway. So engaging with the notion of our generation, I think it's extremely difficult and very dangerous to define a generation. But largely, I think, particularly in the West, we've grown up in a very prosperous times. Well, up until the crisis anyway. In fact, I think we're the generation that's had too much choice and too many options, and in turn, we seem to be struggling with what it is we actually want. And this goes to the heart of values. It's not the how we do things with technology, it's the why we do things, and I think this is extremely important. To me, I see values as somewhat of a mediation between our external world, so the influence we get from our parents, our schools, our societies, and also very much the internal world. It's taking a moment out of all of this to go inward a little bit and be a little bit introspective. And I think today, as a generation, what we struggle with is the external world, this balance between these two worlds. Is the external world is incredibly noisy. The endless amount of communication and information that's coming out both sets us free, but it also confuses us. And I think as a generation, we're struggling more with the notions of identity as well. Following what Mr. Nair said, I think we are a generation that emphasizes the presentation of self rather than the knowledge of self. We have Facebook profiles and Twitter accounts that help us construct our identity, but do they really help us know who we are? So in some ways, I think our generation has turned around, and the question we're kind of facing now is, who are we in an era when we've been raised on the notion that we can be anybody? So I think, well, actually, to demonstrate, right? I ask you, and particularly the young people in the room, who are you, and what do you believe in? Yeah? And it's funny that I've had a lot of responses tell me, this is a bit of a tough question. Yet we can sit there and explain the advanced financial modelling, but we can't have a discussion about who we are. And I think the truth is that if we don't have the words, if we don't have the vocabulary and to discuss what's going on with us like this, then our characters as young people remain somewhat formless and somewhat malleable. And my argument when I reflected upon this a little bit is that I think as a young generation, we're entering this new kind of landscape of values. The traditional values that sort of framed our parents' generation of religion, of patriarchy, of nationalism, they're no longer resonant with us. Instead, we're the generation of sustainability and multiculturalism and globalization. Yet at the same time, we still have some traditional values that ring loudly: love, family, success. But then if we take these traditional values again, family, for instance, family no longer is husband, wife, 2 kids. Family now has broadened, it's open, it's more complex. It's same-sex couples, it's single parents, it's adoptees. Same with success. You know, what is success these days? It's not just money in a house, it's more than that. So really, I think we need to come back and to find a vocabulary that can accommodate and reconcile these pluralities, these contradictions, and these complexities. Because I really believe there's a power in an informed and attuned vocabulary, you know? It's not just about words, it's about making sure that we set the debate, that we drive our ideas home, and that we make sure that our future lives up to our expectations, you know? We're in a time of crisis, the external world is reeling with some great opportunity, but what we see with our young groups, the Tunisian vendor setting himself alight, the global spread of Occupy Wall Street, these are movements that have, yes, they have lodged their protest, but they haven't articulated to us what vision they have of the society they would like to be in. And that, I think, is the heart is words, you know? And we need to heed this as a lesson, basically. So in conclusion, I think we're in a new landscape. I think the future is up for grabs, but for those who can articulate and sell their ideas. Values do not change radically overnight like technology might, but it can be discussed late into the night. And I think for us, that's the side of empowerment. So I come back and I ask you all again, who are you and what do you stand for? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing the topic back to this original, empowering the next generation. Let me turn to Hrishabh, because I think you sort of have both Asian as well as the whatever.
My
the West.
confused world,
Yes.
yeah.
And
I'm sort of growing up in India, living in Europe now, so lots of confusion in my head. Bree, you pretty much said what I wanted to say, so I'm going to be quick. I think the risk of oversimplifying, I think if you go back to the example of the sort of Shaolin code of conduct, humility, courage, honesty, justice, truth, these are sort of traditional values we grew up and we share across many different societies. But again, to oversimplify, I think we need to see new values that emerge in the upstarts, the young overachievers that we are here, the leaders of today. And to me, they're very simple. They're the values of creativity, question more, don't take what is given, sustainability, sustainability in every sense, the environment, economy, society, we need to be able to keep on going. Diversity, again, in every sense, everyone, we need to accept the fact that men, women, we're all equal. Equality, and this comes back to what Professor Pogge was saying, access to medicine, access to resources. This needs to be spread across everyone. And finally, inclusivity. I grew up in India, and I think it was Mr. Naqvi who was talking about how the rich are not done getting rich in India. And I think that's one of the big problems in India today. We're taught to be successful in India and carry on the success to perhaps the family. But we're never taught to think about society. And I think one of the big questions about us as sort of future leaders, or even sort of citizens of the world today, is applying this success at a societal level to make sure it's inclusive. I think that's been the big question in the last couple of years. These values, I mean, again, coming from an Asian perspective, values tend to shape the formative years. I think we need to make it a two-way process where life shapes values and values shape life. So you need to live the experience and also go back and change some certain things. And finally, solutions. How do we implement this in a generation? That's a tough one. I would say technology, even though we have a lot of criticism of technology, and I have my own question about technology later. Use technology, harness it. Let's use what we have to educate more people. Let's go back to the education systems. Let's change them around. I mean, I think I work in a university, and one of the biggest things we're seeing today is we have the jobs. We just don't have people able to fill these jobs. So clearly, we're making mistakes in our teaching. So let's go back and fix this. And finally, to sound very cliched, I think behavior shapes values. And I think we need the leaders of today, all of you sitting out there, to lead by example. Right? And you're going to lead to set the example for us. And that to me is the sort of short spiel. And this, I'm going to sort of use my chance to go into a question here. Scott and I were discussing this yesterday about the legitimacy of the bodies that create these sort of supranational agreements that control our world today. Whether it's for the environment, whether it's for the global commons, whether it's for the internet, whether it's for technology. Where are they getting their authority from? And are we just going to be constricted by the nation state? The nation state is a European idea. We need to move beyond the nation state. There are companies out there. There are multinational corporations. I feel myself as an urban citizen. I don't define with national identity. So these are questions that come to me about what shapes our values.
okay. Good. Anybody wants to say anything? Go ahead.
Can I say something? On the issue of sustainability as well, you will all know that this term is probably one of the most overused and abused term. Everyone's got a sustainability plan. The last I heard that the US Army's got one.
Coca-Cola has a sustainability plan.
I'm not sure if it's carbon neutral drone strikes or vegetarian meals at Guantanamo Bay. But
how about biofuels for military jets and aviation equipment?
I'd rather have not military jets, and then we'll talk about biofuels. But the point I'm trying to make is the sustainability issue needs to be very carefully discussed. It's not about clean tech. Sustainability is essentially then the discussion about what are the limits, right? Who can have what and what. Now, my point, I'll make this short. I don't think this discussion can take place in the Western world. That's what the discussion about sustainability in the US in particular is a very dumbed-down conversation. And I say that all great respect. I go to the US and it's all, okay, it's all about pollution control. Sustainability in the context of a very crowded Asia-Pacific region is about how much can you have and what is the price. And therefore, from my point of view, I distill it to three issues. Essentially, for example, is car ownership a human right? If you go to Asia, you will know that most of our cities need more cars, like I need a hole in my head, right? We created dumps. So then you have to take that right away from people. How do you do this? You can use the measure of economic instruments, etc., but you could have outright bans. The Singaporeans do some of that. So there's then that fundamental issue of rights. Second issue is then, how do you price things? And of course, modern-day capitalism is thrived on a free ride on resources. The price of carbon that we're debating today is just the tip of the iceberg of the free ride we've had on fossil fuels for 100 years. We have to price it, but nobody wants to. And lastly, of course, then is, what is the role of the state? Which is your point. Ultimately, public good is not protected by McDonald's, Coke, or DuPont. Public good, what protects you from me, are rules. Those rules are the rules of the institutions of the state. We need to find ways in Asia-Pacific, I argue, to not demonize the state, which has become the luxury in the Western democratic liberal system. We need to find ways to strengthen the state. And this is the very, very tough discussions we will need to have, because not everyone can have their car. Who will decide? What is the price of energy? Those things. So I think the sustainability debate for the young people, you need to move away from the wishy-washy NGO stuff. It's really about political discussions. It's about pricing and rights. You know?
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to respond. I just wanted to quickly respond to some of the things that have come up now, and also actually link it into a lot of the discussions we've had before the symposium with, the big group of us young people. Is that seems to be, in terms of values, an inherent tension regarding the very conservative institutional structure that the current generation has in place, yeah, and that there's some level of us as younger people questioning and not happy or not convinced by what is. And therefore, I think it's really about getting back into a discussion on our level about whether, and then also, Mr. Nair said again, there's also a conformity within our generation about also just moving into these institutions without thinking about them, because this is how we get success, blah, blah, blah. So I think in some ways we also need to go back to us in negotiating whether we want what these institutions still stand for and whether we're prepared to really fight for change or not, It's our world, right?
Go ahead.
It's been many years since I've heard so much theory of the state being espoused on a public stage in Europe. Last time was in 1975 when I was a student at the University of Munich reading Lenin's theory of the state. I was in Minsk in November. Lenin is alive and well there, by the way. You might find it interesting to visit.
I didn't mention Lenin,
Belarus.
so please don't bring the historical perspective of the West to what I'm talking about the future.
I think there's a very clear track record from across Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa of the mistakes that strong states can play in abusing their citizens. I fully concur that we need to move away from the nation state as the primary locus of authority. The future is competition and cooperation between regions and cities, not at the nation-state level. In the Valley, and I think broadly across the US, we also actively try to embed values at the very beginning into the core of our companies. We view values as a core part of company culture. If you go into Google, for example, values there are part of the reason why Google is a very successful company, but it's also why a lot of people enjoy working there. And Google does have a very active social mission. This is not purely around profit and product, but also Google, all of these things that Google and the most important successful Silicon Valley companies do is based around a very strong value system which is built in up front. This started with Hewlett-Packard back in the 1950s, with Bill and Dave, the HP way.
Maximization of profit is still their ultimate motive.
Yes,
I'm
of course.
suggesting we question that.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting
Okay.
we question the maximization of profit as the ultimate motive.
Okay, and where else are you going to create your jobs from? So of those 7 million people, how many unemployed are there in Spain today of 25 years and lower? 50%. So is the state enterprise the solution for unemployment in Europe today? No, it is not.
But give profit a social face.
Let me go to Christian.
Yeah, I just want to make
the
one
other
more
side.
point concerning empowerment. So as Professor Pogge said, there has to be done much more about helping very poor people and get them out of severe poverty. And in fact, the number of people who live on less than $1.25 per day has been reduced by 300 million people within a few years. So there's progress. And I think when we talk about empowerment, if you live on less than $1.25 per day, we can't really talk about empowerment because you're just on a subsistence level. You're lower than a subsistence level, so you can't think about anything else. So I think really helping people out of poverty is the main cause to, or main means to empower people. But I don't think we empower people by giving them money, just increasing development aid. But this morning it was said that just increasing economic activity and this way help people to help themselves and not just give them money and as soon as you withdraw the money, they are back where they started. I think empowerment is really to help people to be independent and that's one of the most important things, how we can empower people and help the young to really fulfill themselves and make them sustainable.
Okay. Let's go back to Hrishabh. You had something more to say.
No, I'm
Okay. Okay.
Can I just say one thing? I love using the word the strong state, particularly in the West, because immediately then the reaction is, he must be a fascist, or he must be a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. I'm a Democrat. My point is, democracies need to be strong states. Why is the United States today so dysfunctional? It's a weak state. Of course, it's showing its power overseas, but inside it can't do much. Look at Europe. Why aren't decisions being made? Weak states. Democracies need to be weak.
North Korea is a strong state, right?
Sorry?
North Korea is a pretty strong state.
Well, I'm not supporting North Korea. So
give me an example of a strong state that's working.
You go back to the notion that somehow it should be seen through the lens of the European history or the Western history.
Give me a strong state, just one.
China.
China's a strong state.
Of course.
It's working out perfectly there, right?
It's much better than India. So if you're poor today, would you, yeah, exactly. So I'm asking you to think about these things. I don't want to be an apologist for the Chinese either, but think hard. And please don't use the experience of the European or Western experience to then map it over the rest of the world. A strong state doesn't have to be a fascist authoritarian state, but it is a state that can get things done. And that's my point. So please don't use the extremes of North Korea to try and deconstruct the argument. That's not the point.
If I may just add here, I think we're at two extremes. We're talking about the profit and the capital and the companies, and we're talking about the strong state. Yeah. I think they're both the wrong answer. Yeah. I think we need to come up with a new answer that's something more in the middle. Can I
have one comment out? I'm very sorry, I talk too much. Chandran's point, I think you make a valid argument, but I'm not yet convinced, this is a hypothetical question, that moving from one region geographically to another region is the solution. And Bree's comments made me wonder whether we ought to be conceptualizing values at a generational. I'm not convinced that we can have universal values yet, but rather than
human rights, not there. We have universal values.
Rather than moving from Europe to Asia and maybe in 50 years to Latin America or to Africa, I wonder whether generationally, and this may tie back a bit more cleanly, maybe a better way of trying to conceptualize the notion of value and what we put our emphasis on.
Okay, I think we at least accomplished one goal, and that is the heated debate. And thank you. I think we could go on and on and on, but let me just try to sum up or whatever what I can do. And I think there is even though there are 3 topics, technology, wealth, and values, I think we really focused on wealth. What do we mean by wealth? I think we need a new definition of wealth among the younger generation in the different context, in the different landscape, as Bree talked about. And what exactly is the role of technology? What do we need to accomplish? I mean, what do we mean by wealth? How do we create wealth by using the technology in the right way, kind of, right, quote unquote. And I think there is quite a bit of notion of who designs the rules. Is that state, or is that private sector, or what? And I don't think we have this sort of either this or that kind of notion. I think the younger generation, the next generation, it really needs to design something much better and much new. I mean, which really fits your landscape and your context and your future. And I think that requires a lot of thinking. That requires the question, what do we mean by value? Who are we? What do we stand for? And I think that's a very difficult question, and yet I think the whole world is open for you. And so I really would like to encourage you to keep on thinking that where you stand, what do you do things for? But at the same time, I really would like to ask the leaders of today not to sort of avoid talking about all these things. These are the extremes, North Korea, whatever, West versus East, Asia versus whatever. I think these days are over. And we really need to have at least accept the new approach and new models. And that's rather than coming back to the traditional way of doing things. And I really would like to thank all the panelists for the heated discussion. Thank you so much. And I thought it was very interesting because the values, we ended up talking about the values. And as we talked about in the morning, I think the values are the base of courage. I think Lord Griffith talked about it. And I think that's exactly what this symposium is all about, rewarding courage. And that goes back to the question of value. What do we mean by value? How do we create it? How do we define it? How to make sure that we strive for it? Thank you very much. Now let's change gears, and this is the time to celebrate. And I would like to start the celebration of St. Gallen Wings of Excellence Award. We did have 3 winners, and I would like to tell you a little bit more about how many applications we had and so forth. Because this is the 25th anniversary of the Wing of Excellence Award. And we had this year over 1,000 applications from 380 plus universities representing 98 nationalities. And that's at the graduate and postgraduate level. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce to you 3 winners. And if you can come up. Let me start off with the Bree, Romuld, who is the 3rd place. Her paper, her essay was Global Institutions and Followerships. And what she says is that we have too much emphasis on leadership, and we often talk about the crisis of leadership, particularly in politics. But we really need to engage ourselves to the notion of followerships. Because after all, unless we follow, unless we trust, unless we sort of give the leaders the power to lead, the leaders are not going to be able to lead. And I think we are sort of forgetting about this, how to become a very good follower. So her title is Global Institutions and Fellowships, and it's a great pleasure for me to give you this award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks. Thank you.
So you can sit down. Let's go to Rado.
Very much.
That's Rado Dragov, who is in the second place. And he's by nature or inherently pessimistic.
Yes.
That's what I heard. And his title is Think Different, Why We Don't Think Different. And he essentially talked about even though we are supposed to think differently, the globalization and technology has made the effect winner takes them all. And that is not just in the industry, but it's in the professions. So the best sort of course of action for the young generation, at least for now, is to go to business school and to go and work for the bigger corporations.
Yeah.
And that's the picture that he painted.
I encourage you to read the essay. This just barely scratches the surface. So,
Yes?
thank you.
There you go. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Oh,
Yeah. Great. Okay. So be sure to read his essay. Okay, the first place is Kilian Semmelmann, and his title is Stop Being the Current. And he talks about all those riots and Occupy movement here and there, and as if we might think that shows the courage of the young people. But he thinks that's out of fear. Fear of being unemployed, fear of dropping out of the rat race. And so, we really need to take a look at ourselves. And I think what he means by that is the young generation. And the young generation, we really have to reflect upon ourselves and say, are we being the current? And stop being the current. So his message is that stop being the current because we can really change. And his suggestion is that make sure that you encourage both the leaders of today and leaders of tomorrow for the younger generation, the next generation, to take a courageous action rather than just being the current and going for the same thing. So with that note, last but not least, I would like to acknowledge quite a few people who have made this Wings of St. Gallen Wings of Excellence possible. And if I can find it. Yes, okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the members of the final jury. I'm one of them. And chaired by Professor Georg Van Kroll, who is on leave of absence, and that's why I'm taking over this year. But the juries, the members of the final jury who are there. And also I would like to thank the pre-jury, which consists of doctoral students and PhD students, PhDs. And they are supervised by Professor Mueller-Stevens of St. Gallen, University of St. Gallen. And I also would like to thank 43rd ISC members, in particular Nico and Sylvan, who really had worked so hard for this competition. And I would like to thank main partners, particularly Swiss Re and Credit Suisse, particularly Swiss Re because they are really making this competition and this essay competition possible. Last but not least, I would like to thank Rolf Backman, who has worked really hard to make this possible. And for your information, we tried a lot of things new this year, such as this. And we don't know whether we're going to be called back next year or not. But just for your information, we do have bigger picture who has been drawing. And that was the sort of a new attempt to figure out how we can capture the discussion. So with that note, thank you very much.
Yoko, it has on the program that I meant to do a wrap-up session. You've really done the wrap-up session. And the amount of light and heat generated by this panel was terrific. I have to say, this has been by far the most successful Wings of Excellence Award that I've attended in 16 years. It's really been terrific.
Thank you.
At times, I didn't know how a very gracious Japanese lady was going to handle this roughhouse as people started taking on each other. But it really is terrific. You know, in conclusion, I don't really want to say very much. I think today's been a very exciting day. I think for the people of tomorrow, for the students of today, you live in a very exciting world with so much opportunity. And I think one thing we should be aware of is gratitude. You know, 25 years ago, Eastern Europe, the USSR, was a totally different world. And today, if you think of how much we've changed, if I think of, I grew up in the 1950s, in really a very conservative culture. To see the changes that we've had is really quite remarkable. And somehow, you know, one asks yourself the question, are we really grateful for what we have? Secondly, I thought that Michael Noonan, the Irish finance minister, who is clearly a consummate politician, he quoted from the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats that you have to make sure the center holds. Because Yeats said in that famous poem, if the center doesn't hold, things fall apart. And I think what that raises for me is what is fairness and what is justice. And I think that's a very important debate. And it came out tonight in all sorts of ways in this, I think, terrific panel. And thirdly, there's the question of values. I said at the end, when I started, Mrs. Thatcher, she had tremendous courage, but that courage was based, she wasn't arrogant about her values, but she just had very strong values. And I have to say, I must be personal, because the lady from either Australia or New Zealand, I'm not...
Australia.
What?
Australia.
Australia. I thought you had an Australian accent, but I didn't like to be presumptuous. But you asked the question, who are we, or who are you, and what do you stand for? And I have to say, and this is just a personal statement of mine, you know, I come here, and I got excited about coming here because there was this Irish monk who had nothing, and he gave up everything to come, you know, 1,000 miles in order to do something he really believed in. And today we have in this city a World Heritage Site, and we have the Abbey there, and every time I come, I go into the Abbey. Because although I believe in a market economy, I believe that life is much greater than economics and business and finance and the market. Every one of us, I think, has a spiritual dimension and an eternal soul. Each year I go into the Abbey to really get my connections, to really place myself in a bigger picture. And I think tonight the discussion that we had actually on technology and on wealth, on values, it really leads us up to that. This is a very personal conclusion, but I have to tell you, unless I said it, you really wouldn't know me. But on the other hand, I think all of us as human beings will never be satisfied just by the material and just by making money and just by prosperity. And St. Gallen, to me, is important because it leads us on to think about the larger questions of life which you raised. So thank you very much indeed for today. I want to thank, first of all, the students. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. Secondly, I want to thank the panelists, the speakers that we've had today. And then most of all, I want to thank you, because without you, there would be no conference. So thank you very much indeed.